In May 1946, at a star-studded Hollywood party, David Niven's world was upended in an instant. During a playful late-night game of what he called sardines at actor Tyrone Power's home, Niven's young wife, Primie, took a misstep and tumbled down an unlit stone staircase. She was carried out semi-conscious and rushed to the hospital. But shockingly, the vivacious 28-year-old mother of two succumbed to her injuries overnight. The tragedy left Niven, a war-hardened veteran and Hollywood's favorite English gentleman, a widower in shock. It was a cruel twist of fate for a man who had survived the battlefields of World War II and charmed millions on screen. Yet, behind the incomparable poise and pencil mustache, Niven's life off camera veered between light and dark, glitter and grief. His was a life story with all the drama of Hollywood's wild years, from sexual escapades and wild parties in his youth to scandalous rumors, and the hard-earned triumph of a consummate survivor. And finally, the dark, murderous story behind his second marriage would be revealed in a shocking claim. Before we revisit the triumphs and tragedies of this legendary soul, let me know where you're tuning in from. Get yourself a warm cup of coffee. Find a quiet spot. And let's journey back to an era of black and white films and very colorful scandals. To truly understand David Niven, the man who would eventually define the concept of the gentleman for millions of moviegoers, one must look beyond the polished veneer of his later years. Before he was a titan among old Hollywood stars, he was James David Graham Niven, born on March 1st, 1910 in London. Though he would spend his career charming audiences with tales of a romantic Scottish birth, the reality was grounded in the rigid, smog-filled atmosphere of Edwardian England. He was born into aristocracy, but his entry into the world coincided with the collapse of the old order. The Great War was looming, a catastrophe that would not only reshape the geopolitical map, but would shatter the Niven family forever. The defining tragedy of his childhood struck when David was merely 5 years old. His father, William Niven, a brave British Army officer of Scottish lineage, was killed in the carnage of World War I. This loss created a primal wound that never truly healed. The boy was left with a void where a hero should have been, and in his place, Henrietta, whose social ambitions often outweighed her maternal warmth. The household, once secure, became a cold landscape of emotional neglect, setting the stage for a lifetime of seeking validation from strangers in the dark theaters of classic cinema. The situation worsened when Henrietta remarried her choice of husband, Sir Thomas Comyn Platt, a Conservative Party politician, introduced a figure of genuine villainy into young David's life. David and his sister Griselle despised this man, mocking him with the nickname Uncle Tommy, but the hatred was mutual and deeply toxic. Even darker than the open hostility was a whisper that haunted the family corridors, the suspicion that Henrietta and Comyn Platt had been engaged in an affair long before William Niven died on the battlefield. The family long suspected that this man, whom David loathed with every fiber of his being, might actually have been his biological father. The physical resemblance between the two was undeniable, a cruel biological joke that perhaps fueled David's lifelong rebellion against authority. Sent away to boarding school, Niven found himself trading the coldness of home for the brutality of the British education system. In his memoirs, he recounted horrifying abuse, noting that the schoolmasters were often more sadistic than the bullies in the playground. One harrowing incident involved a master who nearly ripped David's ear from his head simply because the 6-year-old boy made a minor error in Latin declension. Niven would later joke that this was why one of his ears stuck out more than the other. turning trauma into a cocktail party anecdote, a coping mechanism that would become his signature style. Expelled from preparatory school for mischief, his hopes of attending Eton College were destroyed. A massive embarrassment for his socially conscious mother. Yet, this failure leads him to a more radical school that treats boys with humanity, offering him a brief response. However, his introduction to adulthood was orchestrated not by school, but by his hated stepfather, in a twisted rite of passage. Uncle Tommy arranged for young man David to have his first intimate experience with a woman named Nessie. It was a transactional, loveless introduction to physical intimacy that likely shaped Niven's view of romance for years to come. Intimacy was something to be acquired, a game to be played, by his late teens. Niven discovered that his natural charm was a far more effective currency than his stepfather's money. He began to engage in love affairs that were dangerous and thrilling. In 1928, at just 18, he entered into a passionate romance with Margaret Wigham, the 15-year-old future Duchess of Argyll. The affair resulted in a pregnancy, sparking a crisis that threatened to ruin them both. Margaret's powerful father was enraged, reportedly wanting to kill Niven, and forced his daughter to endure a secret abortion. It was a brutal awakening to the consequences of passion. Yet Margaret remained in love with David for the rest of her life, proving that, even as a teenager, Niven possessed the magnetic allure of a future star, following family tradition. Niven joined the military, commissioning as a junior officer in the British Army in 1930 after graduating from Sandhurst. There, he perfected the officer and a gentleman persona, the clipped accent, the posture, the impeccable manners that he would later sell to Hollywood. But the reality of garrison life in Malta was suffocating for a young man addicted to excitement. He spent his days dryly polishing boots and dreaming of escape. The final straw was absurdly trivial. His plans to date a beautiful girl were ruined by a mandatory, deathly boring lecture on machine gun technology, unable to bear the monotony any longer. Niven resigned his commission in 1933. It was a reckless move, burning bridges with his past to pursue an uncertain future. He crossed the Atlantic, beginning a period of globe-trotting that read like an adventure novel. He failed at bridge building in Canada, speared sharks in the Caribbean, ran bootleg liquor in New York, and even tried to join rebels in Cuba. He was running from the memory of a dead father, a hated stepfather, and a rigid society that had no place for his wild spirit. Eventually, his wanderlust brought him to the one place on earth where a man could reinvent himself completely, Hollywood. Arriving in the mid-1930s with little money but an abundance of style, David Niven was ready to conquer old Hollywood stars. He was a man who had already lived a dozen lives before the cameras ever started rolling. He carried the scars of his childhood well hidden beneath a Savile Row suit and a blinding smile. He was the perfect recruit for the Dream Factory, a man who had learned from the cradle that appearance was everything, and that the deepest truths were best kept hidden behind a stiff upper lip. The stage was set for his rise. But the shadow of tragedy was already his constant companion. When David Niven arrived in the shimmering heat of Los Angeles in the mid-1930s, he possessed no acting experience, no agent, and barely a dime to his name. What he did have was an impeccably tailored wardrobe, an endless supply of charm, and the sheer audacity of a man who had nothing left to lose. He entered the gates of the Dream Factory not as a trained thespian, but as a personality waiting to be discovered. His entry into the film industry was humble, starting as an extra in the vast pool of atmosphere players at Central Casting. Yet, even in the background, Niven had a way of drawing the eye, a certain aristocratic ease that the camera loved. His big break is now a piece of classic cinema folklore, a perfect example of how Niven often bluffed his way to success. On his very first day of shooting, he was given a single line of dialogue. The direction was simple: say goodbye to a lady boarding a train. Niven delivered the line, "Goodbye, my dear," with such effortless panache and heartbreaking sincerity that it seemed to foretell his entire destiny. As he later recalled with his trademark self-deprecating wit, "I was such a smash in that they hired me to say, 'Hello, my dear,' to someone getting off a train." This tongue-in-cheek anecdote masked a profound truth in just a few seconds of screen time. Niven had distilled the image of the perfect English gentleman: suave, cheerful, and sleek. Hollywood, always hungry for archetypes, realized they had found their definitive Brit. He was soon snapped up by independent producer Samuel Goldwyn. Known for his malapropisms and sharp eye for talent, saw in Niven the potential to be a major star, casting him in films like Mutiny on the Bounty, 1935, and The Charge of the Light Brigade, 1936, alongside his close friend Errol Flynn. The studio system began its work, constructing the persona that audiences would come to adore. They took the raw, rebellious ex-soldier and polished him into a symbol of reliability and wit. He was typecast as the affable charmer, the man who could make a tuxedo look like a second skin, off camera. However, the life of this gentleman was far wilder than anything the Hays Code would allow on screen. Niven fell in with the Hollywood Raj, an exclusive clique of British expatriates that included Rex Harrison, Basil Rathbone, and Boris Karloff. But the epicenter of his social world was the beach house he shared with Errol Flynn. This bachelor pad became legendary in old Hollywood stars' history, known notoriously as Cirrhosis by the Sea, a nickname bestowed by actress Carole Lombard that hinted at the staggering amount of alcohol consumed within its walls. Life was a whirlwind of work by day and debauchery by night. Niven was no monk. He enjoyed a series of romantic flings that kept the gossip columnists working overtime, including a rumored dalliance with the elegant Merle Oberon. The parties he attended were surreal, glittering affairs where reality seemed suspended. Niven later wrote of evenings where the actress Lily Damita paraded about with a leopard on a leash, or where guests found a shark swimming in the swimming pool. It was a golden, hedonistic existence, so perfect that Niven confessed he sincerely hoped those nights would never meet end. By 1939, with his breakout role in Raffles, portraying a suave gentleman thief, he had cemented his place on Hollywood's A-list. He had everything: fame, money, and the adoration of the public. But the mask of the carefree playboy was about to be dropped. In September 1939, the real world crashed into his fantasy. Niven was drinking with friends on a yacht in California when a sailor banged on the hull at dawn to deliver the news Great Britain had declared war on Germany. While many of his compatriots in the Hollywood Raj chose to stay in the safety of California, Niven felt an irresistible, primal call of duty. His studio boss, Samuel Goldwyn, was furious, begging his valuable star to stay put. But Niven, displaying the cleverness of his screen characters, orchestrated a polite ruse. He had his brother send a fake telegram summoning him to report for service, which he then presented to Goldwyn to secure his release. In October 1939, David Niven sailed for England, becoming the only British film star in Hollywood to return home to fight in uniform. Back in Britain, he didn't settle for a comfortable desk job. He rejoined the army and eventually transferred into the elite commandos, a special force formed at the request of Winston Churchill to perform daring, high-profile missions. This was a stark contrast to his life in Tinseltown. The man who had spent years pretending to be a hero in movies like The Charge of the Light Brigade was now living the gritty, terrifying reality of war. He served in the Phantom Signals Unit, roaming behind enemy lines in France and the Netherlands following the D-Day landings. One famous anecdote from the Battle of the Bulge perfectly encapsulates the surreal duality of his life. Stopped by suspicious American sentries looking for German infiltrators, Niven was tested with a question about baseball, a sport he knew nothing about. With German shells falling nearby, Niven replied in his clipped British accent, "I haven't the foggiest, but I did co-star with Ginger Rogers in Bachelor Mother." The reference to classic cinema saved his life, proving his identity to the amused GIs. By the war's end, Niven had risen to the rank of lieutenant colonel and earned the U.S. Legion of Merit. But the war changed him. The carefree bachelor who left Hollywood returned as a man carrying the weight of 27,000 reasons to keep his mouth shut, a reference to a friend's grave he found amidst thousands of others. He maintained a stoic silence about the horrors he had seen, a discretion that only burnished his reputation. He was the rare matinee idol who had actually done the things his characters merely pretended to do. However, the war gave him something more precious than medals. In 1940, amidst the chaos of the Blitz, he met Primie Rollo, a 21-year-old officer in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. It was a coup de foudre, love at first sight. They married in a small church ceremony just weeks later. For Niven, the eternal bachelor, Prime was an anchor. She gave him 2 sons and a sense of belonging he had never known in his cold, aristocratic childhood. By early 1946, with the war over, Niven brought his young family back to Hollywood. He was triumphant. He had survived the slaughter of Europe. His career was picking up right where it left off with a lucrative new contract. And he had a beautiful wife who was quickly charming the Hollywood elite. They bought a house in the sunny hills of Los Angeles, and Primie declared she had never been so happy in her life. It seemed as though David Niven had achieved the ultimate fairy tale ending, but in the narrative of old Hollywood stars. Happiness is often just a prelude to heartbreak. The stage was set for the cruelest twist of fate, one that would shatter his world just as it had become whole. By May 1946, David Niven seemed to have successfully cheated death. He had survived the brutal campaigns of World War II, returning from the chaos of Normandy to the sun-drenched sanctuary of California. He had his health, a revitalized career, and most importantly, his beloved wife, Primie Rollo. Their reunion in Hollywood was meant to be the beginning of a golden age. For 6 idyllic weeks, the Nivens were the picture of happiness, a striking couple that charmed the social elite with their genuine warmth. But in the narrative of old Hollywood stars, happiness is often a fragile interlude before the storm. The tragedy that struck next would be more devastating than any battlefield horror Niven had witnessed. The date was May 19th, 1946. The setting was the palatial home of actor Tyrone Power. It was a typical Sunday gathering, filled with laughter and the relaxed camaraderie of the rich and famous. As the evening conversation lagged, someone proposed a game of sardines, a playful variation of hide and seek. It was an innocent diversion, but it led to a moment that would shatter Niven's world. Primie, vibrant and eager to play, opened a door in the unfamiliar mansion, believing it to be a closet. Instead, she stepped into a pitch-black void. It was the entrance to a steep, unlit stone stairwell, Primie fell headlong into the darkness. The dull thud and the alarmed cry that followed froze the party. David Niven was among the first to reach her, finding his wife unconscious and gravely injured at the bottom of the concrete steps. Yet, even in this moment of sheer terror, Niven's stiff upper lip conditioning took over. He scooped her up in his arms, his face ashen but his voice eerily calm as he repeated, "She'll be all right," a mantra of denial against the encroaching reality. She was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was catastrophic. Primie never regained consciousness and succumbed to her injuries on May 21st, 1946. She was just 28 years old, the woman who had been the light of his life, the mother of his 2 infant sons, was gone in a freak accident that defied all logic. David Niven, at 36, was left a widower, his heart shattered into pieces. The public aftermath was a masterclass in British stoicism. At the funeral, while friends like Clark Gable wept, Niven stood dry-eyed and ramrod straight. He even penned a note of gratitude to the mourners, thanking God for the complete happiness Prime had given him, to the world. He was the picture of dignified grief. But behind closed doors, this Hollywood tragedy had driven him to the edge of madness. In the weeks following her death, Niven grew so despondent that, according to one sensational account, he put a pistol to his head and pulled the trigger, only to find the chamber empty. Whether a game of Russian roulette or a desperate cry for help, it highlighted the utter hollowness of a man who felt he had nothing left to live for. However, a grieving widower with 2 children in Hollywood is rarely allowed to stay alone in his vulnerability. Niven made a catastrophic error. Less than 18 months after Primie's death, he met Hjördis Genberg, a stunning Swedish fashion model. He was mesmerized by her beauty, admitting he had never seen anything so lovely. But this was not love. It was panic, as Niven later confessed. "I was like a drowning man clutching at a reed." They married in 1948, just 6 weeks after meeting. This impulsive union became the central conflict of his remaining years, a golden age scandal that played out behind the curtains of their luxury villas. Hjördis was not Primie. She struggled under the crushing weight of being compared to Niven's sainted first wife. The pressure of being a society hostess and a stepmother to sons she resented drove her into a spiral of depression and severe alcoholism. If Primie was the light, Hjördis became the dark mirror reflecting Niven's own despair. The marriage grew toxic. Hjördis became prone to embarrassing outbursts and public cruelty, often treating Niven with disdain. Roger Moore, a close friend, bluntly described her as a bitch to David, noting that while Niven did everything to please her, she offered nothing but scorn in return. The tension reached such a fever pitch that dark, murderous rumors began to circulate, whispers that would have destroyed his career had they been public. In the early 1980s, a shocking theory emerged suggesting that the beloved gentleman had contemplated murdering his wife to escape their hellish union. The evidence was anecdotal but chilling. Niven once confessed to a friend in a moment of unguarded honesty, "I came home from filming one night and found her drunk in the bath, unable to get out. I thought she would drown. I thought about pushing her down. Oh, God, I wanted her to die." It was a terrifying glimpse into the mind of a man pushed to his limits. There was also a bizarre hunting accident where Hjördis was shot in the face by Niven's companions, though she survived. The whispers in the classic cinema community were vicious had Niven secretly hoped the accident would be fatal. While friends vehemently dismissed the idea that the gallant David would ever harm a fly, the very existence of such rumors speaks to the palpable hatred that defined their marriage. This was the great paradox of his life. To the world, he was the Oscar-winning star of Separate Tables, the witty raconteur, and the symbol of charm. But when the applause died down, he returned to a domestic war zone, trapped in a loveless marriage with a woman who despised him, haunted by the ghost of the wife he couldn't save. He was a prisoner of his own code. I would like to be remembered as one Hollywood actor who never got divorced. He said it was a principle he held on to, even as it slowly crushed his spirit. The studio system offered no help. It only demanded that the show go on. Niven coped through gut, infidelity, and the bottom of a bottle. Reportedly, even having a discreet affair with Princess Margaret to find the warmth he was denied at home. He was the saddest man in the room, making everyone else laugh while his own heart remained shattered. This was the true cost of the old Hollywood star's lifestyle, a public mask of perfection worn over a private face of agony. By the early 1980s, the curtain was beginning to fall on David Niven, but not in the graceful way he might have scripted. The first signs were subtle but cruel. The man whose voice, crisp, witty, and perfectly modulated, had been his instrument for decades, began to falter. In interviews, his words slurred. To the public, long accustomed to seeing him with a martini in hand, the assumption was immediate and forgiving. Niv was just enjoying one too many cocktails. He laughed it off publicly, blaming exhaustion. But privately, he knew something was terribly wrong. The truth was a diagnosis that struck with the force of a Greek tragedy. In 1980, Niven was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. It was a neurodegenerative condition that would slowly rob him of his ability to move, speak, and swallow, all while leaving his sharp mind perfectly intact. It was a prison of flesh as the disease progressed. The dapper gentleman who once charmed the world in a tuxedo began to wither. He refused to let the public see him as a victim, in a final act of dignity. He withdrew from the prying eyes of Hollywood to his snowy sanctuary in Chateau d'Ux, Switzerland. He wanted to be remembered as he was standing tall, not wasting away. The end came in the height of summer, on July 29th, 1983, in his Swiss chalet, surrounded by the spectacular alpine vistas he loved. The 73-year-old star fought his final battle. By this time, the man who had survived the beaches of Normandy weighed barely 100 pounds. The silence in the room was a stark contrast to the roar of laughter he had generated for 50 years. Fittingly, despite the years of marital torment, his family was there. Hjördis, his troubled wife, and all 4 of his children gathered by his bedside. It was a moment of complex emotions, relief that his suffering was ending, and profound sorrow for the loss of a spirit that had seemed indomitable. Death did not come as a sudden dramatic event, but as a quiet, fading light. The moon was a balloon, as he had titled his memoir, and the string had finally been cut. The aftermath of his death revealed the true measure of the man. Tributes poured in from around the globe, from royalty to movie moguls. Prince Charles lamented the loss of a symbol of everything that was good about Britain, but the most poignant tribute at his London memorial service did not come from a studio head or a fellow Oscar winner. Amidst the expensive floral arrangements, the largest wreath came from the baggage porters at Heathrow Airport. These working-class men, who had seen thousands of celebrities pass through their halls, sent a simple, heartbreaking note to the finest gentleman who ever walked through these halls. He made a porter feel like a king. This was David Niven's true epitaph. In a life marked by high glamour and deep tragedy, his greatest performance wasn't on screen. It was the kindness he showed when the cameras weren't rolling. The star had faded, but the gentleman remained immortal. David Niven was the ultimate illusionist of old Hollywood stars. We watched him in films like Around the World in 80 Days or The Pink Panther, and saw a man without a care in the world. But looking back, his life asks a haunting question. What is the true cost of a smile for Niven? The price was a lifetime of suppressed grief. He traded his tears for our applause. He buried the trauma of a lonely childhood, the horror of war, and the shattering loss of his wife deep beneath a tuxedo and a well-timed quip. We were drawn to him not just because he was charming, but because on some level, we sensed the bravery behind the act. He was a survivor who refused to burden the audience with his pain. Yet, his story is also a subtle indictment of the Hollywood system. It was a glittering world that allowed no room for male vulnerability. When his world collapsed in 1946, the industry didn't offer therapy or time off. It offered him another script and a stiff drink. The show must go on. The mentality that Niven adhered to so religiously was also the cage that trapped him. He remained married to a woman who reportedly tormented him because the role of the perfect gentleman didn't allow for the messiness of divorce. He was, in many ways, a victim of his own impeccable standards. However, let us not remember him as a victim. David Niven's legacy is one of triumph. He proved that style is more than just clothes. It is an attitude in the face of adversity. The most defining moment of his career wasn't a movie scene, but the 1974 Oscars. When a naked man suddenly streaked across the stage, Niven didn't panic. He glanced at the intruder and improvised the most famous line in Academy history. Isn't it fascinating to think that probably the only laugh that man will ever get in his life is by stripping off his clothes and showing his shortcomings? In that split second, he showed us exactly who he was, a man of unshakable grace under fire. Life threw tragedy after tragedy at him. War, death, illness, and he disarmed them all with a raised eyebrow and a laugh. He taught us that while we cannot control the script of our lives, we can always control how we play the scene. If you've been moved by the incredible of David Niven, please like this video and subscribe to Hollywood Mysteries for more untold stories. Do you think modern stars have the same resilience as the old guard? Let me know in the comments below.